The dragonling huddled in the shadow of broken stone pillars, her small body trembling as another cold wind swept across the wasteland. Ember, though she didn't know that name yet, pressed herself tighter against the ruins of what had once been her family's nesting ground. 3 months. It had been 3 months since the sickness came, since she watched her mother's golden eyes dim forever, since her brothers and sisters stopped moving one by one. She was alone now. Completely, terribly alone. At barely past her first molting, Ember was still too small to bring down the larger prey that roamed these volcanic plains. Her wings weren't strong enough to carry her far, and her fire breath, that gift all dragons possessed, was weak, barely more than sparks and smoke. She survived on beetles and small lizards, whatever she could catch in the cracks between rocks. Her once bright crimson scales had gone dull, covered in dust and ash. Several tears ran through her wing membranes from a recent escape when older dragons had chased her away from a water source. This was her life now. Hiding. Starving. Waiting for the day when she'd become too weak to run anymore. The sky above Draco Prime was always the color of rust, choked with ash from the volcanoes that ringed the horizon. Nothing grew here except twisted thornbushes and patches of toxic lichen. Ember remembered, in the hazy way young creatures remember, when there had been more dragons in the sky. When the ruins around her had echoed with calls and songs. But that was before. Before the plague swept through like invisible fire, taking almost everything. She'd learned to recognize the sounds of danger, the clicking of the six-legged hunters that prowled at night, the wing beats of rival dragons passing overhead, the rumble that meant a lava flow was shifting somewhere in the distance. Every sound made her freeze, made her heart race in her narrow chest. But then came a sound she'd never heard before. It started as a distant roar, like thunder but wrong somehow, sustained and growing louder. Ember lifted her wedge-shaped head from where she'd been trying to extract a grub from beneath a rock. The sound came from above, from the rust-colored sky itself. She craned her neck upward and saw it, a streak of light, but not a falling star. This was different. It screamed as it fell, trailing smoke, spinning end over end. The object, whatever it was, slammed into the obsidian plains about 2 miles from Ember's hiding place. The impact shook the ground beneath her claws, sent up a plume of dust and debris that mushroomed into the toxic air. Ember's first instinct was to flee, to find a deeper crack in the ruins to hide in. But something else stirred inside her, something she hadn't felt in months. Curiosity. She waited until the ground stopped shaking, until the dust began to settle. Then, moving low and careful, she crept toward the crash site. It took her nearly an hour to cover the distance, stopping frequently to check for threats, to make sure no other predators had been drawn by the noise. What she found made her stop in her tracks, head tilting in confusion. The thing was made of metal, smooth and silver in places, blackened and torn in others. It had gouged a long scar across the black volcanic glass of the plains before coming to rest in a smoking heap. Parts of it were still glowing red-hot. Strange symbols marked its surface, and transparent panels, most of them shattered, revealed a hollow interior. And inside, something moved. Ember froze, every muscle tensed to run. But the movement was weak, accompanied by sounds she'd never heard, not growls or roars, but something else. Words, maybe, in a language that meant nothing to her young mind. She crept closer, using the wreckage itself as cover, until she could peer through one of the broken panels. The creature inside was unlike anything in Ember's experience. It had no scales, no wings, no tail. Its body was covered in some kind of artificial skin, white and bulky, but torn now, leaking strange mists into the air. 4 limbs, but arranged differently than a dragon's. And its face, Ember stared at that face. 2 eyes, like hers, but smaller, rounder. A small nose and mouth. Hair, dark and matted with something red that Ember's instincts recognized as blood. The creature, Lieutenant Rachel Martinez, though Ember couldn't know that, was badly hurt. One of her legs bent at a wrong angle. Her breathing came in short, pained gasps. The suit's breach meant toxic atmosphere was slowly seeping in, and Rachel's vision was blurring, her lungs burning. Through her pain and delirium, Rachel saw the dragonling. Her xenobiology training, even compromised by oxygen deprivation, recognized what she was looking at. A juvenile. Young, malnourished, clearly alone. They regarded each other through the shattered canopy, 2 beings at the absolute edge of survival, meeting in the ruins of a dead world. Rachel's hand moved slowly, trembling with effort. She extended it toward the dragon, palm open, fingers spread. The gesture was universal among humans. Look, no weapons, no threat. Hey there, she whispered, her voice barely audible through her damaged helmet speakers. Hey, little one. I won't hurt you. Ember should have run. Every survival instinct screamed at her to flee from this unknown thing. But something in that gesture, in that voice, spoke to the desperate loneliness that had been eating at her for 3 months. She took one step closer. Then another. The creature's eyes, Rachel's eyes, weren't predatory. They were scared, yes, but also sad. Also alone. Ember recognized that look because she'd seen it in the puddles of stagnant water when she caught her own reflection. She moved closer still, until she was right beside the wreckage. Rachel's extended hand wavered, then lowered to rest on a piece of torn metal. Ember sniffed at it carefully, her nostrils flaring. Strange scents, metals and polymers and something organic underneath, something warm and alive. That's it, Rachel breathed. That's a good girl. Or boy. I can't really tell from here. A weak laugh that turned into a cough. I'm Rachel. I don't suppose you understand me, but I'm going to talk anyway. Keeps me conscious. Ember didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Gentle. Unthreatening. The same tone her mother had used, in those last days before the sickness took her voice away. The sun, dim and red behind the ash clouds, was setting. Temperature would drop soon, and the night hunters would emerge. Ember made a decision that she didn't fully understand. Instead of returning to her hiding place in the ruins, she curled up beside the wreckage, near where the strange creature lay injured. Her body heat was small, but it was something. And for the first time since her mother died, Ember pressed herself close to another living being and didn't feel afraid. Rachel, fighting to stay conscious, felt the warmth of the dragonling's body through her torn suit. Tears tracked down her face inside the helmet. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for staying. Neither of them knew it yet, but in that moment, everything changed. A human and a dragon, both orphaned in their own ways, had found each other in the dark. Rachel woke to find the dragonling still there, watching her with those large golden eyes. Through the night, despite her injuries and failing suit systems, she'd somehow survived. Maybe it was the warmth of the small creature pressed against the wreckage. Maybe it was pure stubborn luck. Either way, dawn had come to Draco Prime, and both of them were still breathing. Her leg throbbed with a deep, nauseating pain, but Rachel forced herself to think clearly. She was a trained xenobiologist and engineer. If she was going to survive long enough for rescue, if rescue even came, she needed to get her suit's life support working again. The breach in her left side had sealed itself partially with emergency foam, but it wouldn't hold forever. Moving carefully so as not to startle her unexpected companion, Rachel began pulling components from the wreckage. The dragonling watched every movement with intense focus, her head tilting at different angles like a curious bird. When Rachel pulled out a power cell and it hummed to life, the dragon jumped back several feet, a small puff of smoke escaping her nostrils. It's okay, Rachel said softly, keeping her movements slow. Just a battery. Makes things work. See? She held it up, letting the dragonling examine it from a safe distance. Over the next few hours, Rachel worked methodically, cannibalizing parts from the destroyed ship. Her training took over, pushing past the pain. She managed to patch the worst of the suit breaches and get the air filtration working at maybe 60% capacity. Not great, but enough to keep her alive. The communications array, though, that was completely fried. The emergency beacon was working, but its range was pathetically short. Maybe a few light years at best. She checked her supplies. 3 weeks of ration bars, maybe 4 if she stretched them. Water recycling was functional. Medical supplies were limited, she'd already used most of the trauma foam on her leg. The math was brutal but simple. She had maybe a month before starvation, dehydration, or infection killed her. Rescue could take twice that long, if it came at all. The dragonling hadn't left. She'd retreated to a safe distance while Rachel worked, but her eyes never stopped watching. Rachel could see the creature was painfully thin, ribs visible beneath those dull red scales. When Rachel finally sat down to eat one of her ration bars, the dragon's nostrils flared, and she crept a few inches closer. Rachel broke off a small piece and held it out. Hungry? Yeah, I bet you are. The dragonling stared at the offered food for a long moment, clearly torn between hunger and caution. Finally, moving so fast Rachel almost missed it, she darted forward, snatched the piece from Rachel's hand, and retreated. She swallowed it without chewing, then looked expectantly for more. Rachel smiled despite everything. Okay, we can share. But not too much, I don't know if this stuff is even safe for you. She tossed another small piece, which the dragon caught in midair with surprising grace. You need a name, Rachel said, studying the creature. In the better light of day, She could see the faint glow that pulsed beneath the scales, like embers in a dying fire. Ember. That's what I'll call you. Ember. The dragon tilted her head at the sound, as if considering it. Over the following days, a routine developed. Rachel spent her mornings working on the beacon, trying to boost its signal with whatever parts she could salvage. Ember would disappear for hours, hunting in the volcanic wastes, then return to the crash site. At first, Rachel worried the dragon wouldn't come back, but she always did. And she began bringing things: small lizards she'd caught, colorful stones, bits of metal from other ruins. Offerings. Rachel started studying Ember more carefully, the scientist in her awakening despite the dire circumstances. She recorded observations in her suit's damaged datapad. The way Ember used rocks to crack open the armored shells of the beetle-like creatures that lived in the lava tubes. The complex chirps and growls she made, which weren't random, they had patterns, structure. The way she arranged stones in careful circles near a pile of larger bones in the distance. "You're smart, aren't you?" Rachel said one evening as they shared another ration bar. "Really smart. Not just animal smart. Something more." Ember watched her with those knowing eyes, and Rachel felt certain the dragon understood more than she should. The attack came on the 8th night. Rachel had been half asleep when Ember's warning shriek jolted her awake. Through her helmet display, she saw them, 6-legged predators, 4 of them, each the size of a large wolf. They moved with horrible speed across the black rocks, drawn by the heat signatures of the camp. Rachel scrambled for her plasma cutter, the only weapon that had survived the crash. Her hands shook as she powered it up. The creatures were closing in, their multiple legs clicking against stone, their mouths opening to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. Then Ember launched herself into the air with a powerful beat of her torn wings. She was small, barely larger than the predators themselves, but she fought with desperate fury. Fire burst from her jaws, not the weak sparks Rachel had seen before, but actual flames that sent one of the creatures reeling back, its fur smoking. Ember dove at another, raking it with her claws, her tail whipping around to strike a third. Rachel found her courage. She activated the plasma cutter and swung it at the nearest predator, the superheated blade cutting through chitin and flesh. The creature screamed and retreated. Another tried to circle around, but Ember was there, snapping at its legs, forcing it back. The fight lasted maybe 2 minutes but felt like hours. When it was over, 2 of the predators lay dead, and the other 2 had fled into the darkness. Rachel stood gasping, her injured leg threatening to give out. Then she saw Ember, collapsed on the ground, blood seeping from deep gashes along her flank. No, 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 Rachel dropped beside her, her training kicking in. She pulled out her medical kit, hands steady now despite her fear. The wounds were deep but not fatal if she could stop the infection. She cleaned them as best she could, applied antibiotic gel, and wrapped them with the last of her bandages. Ember whimpered, a sound so heartbreakingly small that Rachel felt tears in her eyes. "I've got you," she whispered, running her hand gently over the dragon's head, avoiding the small horns. "I've got you, baby. You saved me. Now let me save you." She worked through the night, monitoring Ember's breathing, adjusting the bandages, keeping her warm with a thermal blanket from the emergency kit. The dragon's eyes opened occasionally, finding Rachel's face, and each time Rachel was there, talking softly, promising she wouldn't leave. By morning, Ember's breathing had steadied. The wounds looked better, no signs of infection yet. When Rachel offered water in a container, Ember drank weakly, then rested her head in Rachel's lap. Something had shifted between them. It wasn't just survival anymore, wasn't just 2 creatures helping each other out of necessity. Rachel stroked the dragon's scales and felt a fierce protectiveness surge through her chest. This wasn't a specimen or an interesting alien life form. This was her kid. Her responsibility. Her family. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you," Rachel promised, her voice firm despite exhaustion. "Whatever it takes, Ember. Whatever it takes." The dragonling's tail curled around Rachel's leg, and in that gesture, Rachel understood. Ember had chosen her too. In a universe of endless space and countless worlds, they'd found each other. And somehow, against all logic and odds, they belonged together. The beacon continued its steady pulse into the void, calling for rescue. But Rachel knew now that if a ship came, she wouldn't leave alone. She couldn't. They were a package deal now, a human and a dragon, learning to trust in a universe that had given them every reason not to. 21 days had passed since the crash when Rachel's suit computer finally chirped with the alert she'd been waiting for. A vessel had picked up her beacon. The cargo hauler Meridian Dawn was altering course and would reach Draco Prime in 5 days. 5 days until rescue. 5 days until she could leave this toxic wasteland behind. Rachel should have felt relieved. She should have celebrated. Instead, she sat staring at the message display while her stomach twisted into knots. Because 5 days until rescue also meant 5 days until she had to figure out what to do about Ember. The Dragonling had grown noticeably in the 3 weeks they'd been together. She was sleeker now, her scales brighter from regular meals. Rachel had been sharing her rations, probably more than she should have, and Ember had been hunting better with the techniques Rachel taught her. The gashes from the predator attack had healed into thin scars along her flank. She was thriving. And she'd become utterly devoted to Rachel. Ember rarely left her side now. She slept curled around Rachel's makeshift shelter every night, her body heat keeping the cold at bay. She brought Rachel gifts constantly, pretty stones, interesting pieces of metal from the ruins, once even a flower-like plant she'd found growing near a hot spring. When Rachel worked on repairs or studied her datapad, Ember watched intently, her golden eyes following every movement. But it was more than just attachment. Rachel had been documenting everything, and what she'd discovered was extraordinary. She'd managed to access the deeper files in her ship's damaged computer, pulling up xenological surveys of Draca Prime from decades past. The dragons weren't just intelligent animals. They'd been a civilization once. Thousands of years ago, they'd built cities, created art, developed language. The ruins scattered across this world weren't natural formations, they were buildings, temples, monuments to a culture that had flourished and then collapsed. A plague had swept through their population about 300 years ago, the record said. It had killed 98% of the dragons and destroyed their social structures. The survivors had scattered, reverting to feral behavior over generations. But the capacity for intelligence hadn't disappeared. It was still there, locked inside their genetics, waiting for the right conditions to emerge again. And Ember was proving it every single day. Rachel had started teaching her words, just simple ones at first, using her suit's external speakers. Food. Water. Danger. Safe. She'd point to objects and repeat the words, the way you'd teach a young child. Ember's progress had been astounding. Within a week, she understood dozens of words. She'd tilt her head at Rachel's voice, process the sounds, then try to mimic them with her own complex vocal organs. Ember, the Dragonling had managed yesterday, the syllables rough but unmistakable. Rachel had actually cried when she heard it. Now Rachel sat watching Ember practice hunting techniques on a rock, pouncing and striking with her claws, and the weight of her decision pressed down like a physical thing. The Meridian Dawn would have protocols. Interstellar law was clear about removing indigenous species from their home worlds. It was illegal, considered a form of ecological crime. The captain would take Rachel aboard, grateful to rescue a stranded officer. But Ember? Ember would be left behind. Alone again. In a wasteland with dwindling prey and hostile rivals and no one to teach her the language her people had forgotten. Rachel pulled up the legal codes on her datapad, reading through them for the 100th time, searching for any loophole. There had to be something. The regulations had exceptions for sapient species, for beings with language and culture and complex thought. But proving sapience required documentation, expert testimony, formal review boards. Things that took months or years, not 5 days. What am I going to do? Rachel whispered. Ember's head swiveled toward her at the sound of distress in her voice. The Dragonling abandoned her practice and trotted over, making a concerned chirping sound. She nudged Rachel's arm with her snout, then settled down beside her, radiating warmth. Rachel wrapped an arm around Ember's neck, burying her face against those crimson scales. I can't leave you here. I can't. But I don't know how to take you with me. That night, while Ember slept, Rachel made a decision. She spent hours compiling every bit of evidence she had. Videos of Ember using tools, responding to language, showing emotional complexity. Audio files of her vocalizations with analysis showing linguistic patterns. Historical records of Draca civilization. Medical scans showing brain structure consistent with sapience. She organized it all into a comprehensive file and attached it to her response to the Meridian Dawn. Her message was simple: Lieutenant Rachel Martinez requesting extraction. 2 passengers. 1 human, 1 sapient minor requiring humanitarian protection under Article 12 of the Interstellar Species Rights Convention. Full documentation attached. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The reply came 30 hours later. Captain Bennett's face appeared on her screen, a weathered man with gray at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. Lieutenant Martinez, we received your message and documentation. I need to be clear about something. What you're requesting is highly irregular. Removing an indigenous life form, even a potentially sapient one, requires. I know what it requires, Rachel interrupted. I've read the regulations. Article 12 states that any being demonstrating sapient characteristics has the right to protection from harm, including abandonment in hazardous conditions. Ember is a juvenile, orphaned, and incapable of surviving long-term without support. She's also demonstrating clear sapient traits. I'm claiming legal guardianship under Human Custody Law, Section 7, which extends to sapient minors of any species. The captain was quiet for a long moment. You understand this will trigger an investigation? Legal review? You could face charges if this doesn't hold up. I understand. But I'm not leaving her here to die. Another pause. I'll need to consult with our legal AI. Stand by. The next 18 hours were the longest of Rachel's life. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Ember sensed her distress and stayed close, making worried sounds, pressing against her side. Rachel held her and whispered promises she desperately hoped she could keep. When the response finally came, Rachel's hands shook as she opened it. Lieutenant Martinez, after review of the provided evidence and consultation with legal databases, the AI has ruled in favor of preliminary sapient classification for the entity designated Ember. You are granted temporary guardianship pending full review by the Interspecies Council. Prepare for extraction in 72 hours. Be advised, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do when we reach civilization. Rachel read the message 3 times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. Then she looked at Ember, who was watching her with those knowing golden eyes. We did it, Rachel breathed. You hear me? We did it. You're coming with me. But even as relief flooded through her, Rachel knew the hard part was just beginning. Getting permission to take Ember off-world was one thing. Actually integrating a dragon into human society? Finding her proper care? Navigating the bureaucracy and the skeptics and the people who'd say she was crazy? That would be the real challenge. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Rachel showed Ember images on her datapad, spaceships, stations, other humans. She tried to prepare her for what was coming, though she had no idea if Ember truly understood. The Dragonling seemed more interested in staying close to Rachel than in the pictures of strange new worlds. When the meridian dawn finally descended through Draco Prime's ash-filled sky, Ember panicked. She'd never seen anything so large, heard engines so loud. She tried to flee, her wings beating frantically. Rachel had to hold her, speak softly, calm her down. It's okay, baby. It's okay. I'm right here. I'm not leaving you. We're going together, remember? Together. The word together seemed to register. Ember stopped struggling, though she trembled against Rachel's side. The ship's cargo bay opened, and Captain Bennett descended the ramp with 2 crew members. He stopped short when he saw Ember up close, nearly the size of a large dog now, scaled and clawed and definitely not human. So this is your sapient minor, he said carefully. This is Ember, Rachel confirmed. And yes, she's coming aboard. The captain studied them both, the injured, determined woman and the frightened dragon pressed against her side. Finally, he nodded. All right, Lieutenant. Let's get you both home. The cargo hold of the Meridian Dawn wasn't designed for dragons. It was a cold, metallic space filled with shipping containers and the smell of recycled air and machine oil. Ember hated it immediately. She pressed herself against Rachel's leg, her whole body tense, a low rumbling sound building in her throat. Easy, girl, Rachel murmured, stroking the scales along Ember's neck. I know it's scary. But we're safe here. Captain Bennett kept his distance, which Rachel appreciated. The 2 crew members with him, a woman named Kelly and a younger guy named David, couldn't stop staring. David actually had his hand on a stun baton, though he was trying to be subtle about it. She's not going to hurt anyone, Rachel said firmly. She's frightened, not aggressive. There's a difference. That thing has teeth the size of my fingers, David muttered. That thing saved my life, Rachel shot back. Show some respect. The journey to the nearest station took 6 days. 6 days that tested every bit of patience Rachel had. The crew wanted Ember confined to the cargo hold. Rachel refused and camped out there with her, sleeping on the floor, eating rations in the cold. Ember wouldn't let anyone else near her. The one time Kelly tried to bring Rachel a blanket, Ember had positioned herself between them, smoke curling from her nostrils. She's protective, Rachel explained. She's been through trauma. Lost her whole family. Right now, I'm all she has. But Ember was growing. Visibly. By the 3rd day, She'd outgrown the size of a large dog and was pushing toward something closer to a small pony. Her appetite was enormous, she ate more than Rachel had rations for. Captain Bennett grudgingly authorized access to the ship's protein stores, but Rachel could see the concern in his eyes. "How big does she get?" he asked on day 4, watching Ember crack open a protein block with her jaws. "Full grown?" "Maybe the size of a shuttle," Rachel admitted. "But that's years away. She's still basically a toddler right now." The captain's expression said everything about what he thought of that information. Rachel spent those 6 days preparing for the battle she knew was coming. She reviewed interstellar law until her eyes burned. She practiced her arguments. She gathered every piece of evidence she had and organized it into an airtight case. Because once they reached Gateway Station, the real fight would begin. Gateway Station was a massive hub orbiting a dead planet in neutral space. It served as a customs checkpoint, a trading post, and a bureaucratic nightmare all rolled into one. When the Meridian Dawn docked, Rachel was met by station security, 2 legal officers, and a xenobiologist named Dr. Helen Ortiz. Ember growled the moment strangers entered the cargo hold. She positioned herself in front of Rachel, wings partially spread despite the cramped space, making herself look bigger than she was. "Everyone stop," Rachel commanded. "Give her space. She needs to feel safe." Dr. Ortiz, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, held up her hands in a peaceful gesture. "It's all right. I'm here to help." She looked at Rachel. "You're the one who filed the Sapiens claim." "I am. And I have documentation to support it." The legal review took 3 days. 3 agonizing days where Rachel and Ember were confined to a quarantine section of the station. It was better than the cargo hold, climate-controlled, with proper facilities, but Ember hated being caged. She paced constantly, her tail lashing, occasionally sending small bursts of flame toward the transparent barriers when station personnel walked by. Rachel tried to keep her calm, but she was fighting her own anxiety. Through the transparent walls, she could see officials coming and going, reviewing her files, arguing among themselves. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could read body language. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked skeptical or outright hostile. On the evening of the second day, Dr. Ortiz came to visit alone. She stood outside the quarantine barrier, studying Ember with professional interest. "May I speak with her?" she asked Rachel. "You can try. She doesn't trust strangers easily." Dr. Ortiz pulled up a chair and sat down, making herself non-threatening. Then she did something unexpected. She started speaking in a series of clicks, growls, and musical tones. Dragon language, or an approximation of it. Ember's head snapped around, her eyes widening. She took a step toward the barrier, tilting her head, listening intently. Dr. Ortiz continued, her voice patient and gentle. After a moment, Ember responded. The sounds were rough, unpracticed, but they were definitely language. An actual conversation was happening. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. "How do you know their language?" "I've been studying the Draker people for 20 years, Dr. Ortiz said, switching back to human speech. "I was part of the original survey team that documented their ruins. I've always believed their language could be reconstructed." She smiled at Ember. "And here's living proof." She turned to Rachel. "Your documentation is thorough. The video evidence of tool use is compelling. The linguistic analysis is solid. But what really matters is this," she gestured to Ember, who was still watching her with intense focus. "She's sapient. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with her can see it. She thinks, she feels, she bonds. The question isn't whether she qualifies for protection. The question is what happens next." "What do you mean?" Dr. Ortiz's expression grew serious. "Even if the legal board rules in your favor, and I think they will, you're talking about raising a dragon. A creature that will grow to weigh several tons and breathe actual fire. You're a military officer, not a xenobiologist. You have no specialized training in dragon care. No proper facilities. And honestly, no real idea what you're getting into." Rachel felt her defenses rise. "I know she needs specialized care. I'm not stupid. But I also know she needs stability. She needs someone who loves her. You can't tell me some sterile research facility is better than." "I'm not saying that," Dr. Ortiz interrupted gently. "I'm saying we need a plan. There's a facility on Terra Nova, the Interspecies Development Center. We work with uplifted species, rehabilitation cases, sapient minors who need support. I'm the director there." Rachel's heart sank. "You want to take her?" "No. I want to help you keep her." Dr. Ortiz leaned forward. Here's what I'm proposing. You and Ember come to Terra Nova. We modify your living situation to accommodate a growing dragon. We provide medical support, educational resources, behavioral consultation. You remain her primary guardian, but you have a team behind you. Because Rachel, you can't do this alone. It's too big. She's too important. Why would you do that? Dr. Ortiz looked at Ember, and her expression was one of wonder. Because she might be the key to bringing the Draca people back from extinction. Because cross-species bonding like this is extraordinarily rare and valuable to study. And because, she met Rachel's eyes, because what you've done here is remarkable. You've given her something no research facility could. You've given her love. I don't want to take that away. I want to build on it. The legal board's decision came the next morning. Rachel stood in front of a panel of 5 officials, Ember at her side. The Dragonling had refused to be separated from her, so the board had reluctantly allowed her presence. The head official, a stern man named Administrator Chen, read from a datapad. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, this board rules that the entity designated Ember demonstrates sufficient markers of sapience to qualify for protective status under interstellar law. Lieutenant Rachel Martinez is granted legal guardianship pending ongoing review and compliance with safety protocols. Rachel's knees almost gave out with relief. However, Administrator Chen continued, this guardianship comes with conditions. First, the minor must receive proper developmental support through an accredited facility. Second, quarterly evaluations will be conducted to ensure appropriate care. Third, any incident resulting in harm to others will result in immediate revocation of guardianship. Do you accept these terms? I do, Rachel said without hesitation. Dr. Ortiz stepped forward. The Interspecies Development Center formally offers sponsorship and support services for this guardianship, effective immediately. Administrator Chen nodded. Very well. This hearing is concluded. As they left the administrative section, Rachel felt Ember's tail wrap around her wrist, a gesture the Dragonling had started doing when she wanted reassurance. Rachel squeezed gently. We did it, she whispered. You're mine. Officially. No one can take you away now. Ember made a soft chirping sound and pressed her head against Rachel's shoulder. In that moment, Rachel felt the full weight of what she'd taken on. Raising a dragon. Fighting bureaucracy. Rebuilding a fallen civilization, one orphan at a time. But when she looked at Ember, at those intelligent golden eyes full of trust and hope, Rachel knew she'd made the right choice. Come on, kiddo, she said. Let's go home. 3 years had changed everything. Rachel stood on the porch of her modified ranch house, watching the sunrise paint Terra Nova's sky in shades of purple and gold. The planet's twin moons were still visible, fading slowly as daylight grew stronger. Behind her, she heard the unmistakable sound of Ember waking up, a yawn that rattled the reinforced walls, followed by the scratch of massive claws against the specially treated flooring. A moment later, Ember's head emerged through the oversized doorway, scales gleaming like polished rubies in the morning light. She'd grown into her full size now, her wingspan stretching nearly 40 feet when fully extended. Her horns had lengthened and curved back elegantly, and the dull hatchling scales had transformed into brilliant crimson and gold that seemed to shimmer within a fire. Morning, beautiful, Rachel said, running her hand along Ember's snout. Even standing on the porch, Rachel barely came up to Ember's shoulder now. Good morning, Mom, Ember replied, her voice a rich, musical sound that still gave Rachel chills every time she heard it. The words were clear, perfectly pronounced in galactic standard with just a hint of that distinctive draconic resonance that made everything she said sound like it was being sung. 3 years. 3 years since that desperate rescue from Gateway Station. 3 years since they'd arrived on Terra Nova with nothing but hope and determination. The early days had been brutal. Rachel had left the military, cashing in every benefit and saving she had to purchase this property on Terra Nova's frontier. The land was cheap because it was remote, 50 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by rocky hills and vast stretches of grassland. Perfect for a growing dragon who needed space. Dr. Ortiz and her team from the Interspecies Development Center had been lifesavers. They'd helped modify the house with reinforced structures that could handle Ember's weight and size. They'd set up a communication system so Rachel could consult with specialists whenever she needed. They'd provided educational materials, teaching resources, medical equipment. But the real work had been Rachel's. Teaching Ember to read had taken months of patient effort, starting with simple picture books and working up to complex texts. Teaching her to write had required specially designed styluses that could handle her claws. Teaching her to control her fire breath so she didn't accidentally set things ablaze had involved more than a few burnt trees and scorched patches of earth. And the emotional work, helping Ember process the trauma of losing her birth family, dealing with the loneliness of being the only dragon on an entire planet, navigating the complicated feelings of being caught between two worlds, that had been the hardest part of all. But they'd made it work. More than that, they'd thrived. Are they arriving today? Ember asked, settling down beside the porch, her tail curling around herself in a way that Rachel recognized as nervous excitement. The first transport lands at noon, Rachel confirmed. 4 of them this time. All juveniles, all orphans or ferals that were found alone. Ember's eyes brightened, and she stretched her wings, a gesture Rachel had learned meant happiness. I've prepared the Eastern Cave system. Fresh water, plenty of space, good ventilation for fire-breathing practice. Rachel smiled. Over the past year, she and Ember had been working on something extraordinary. With help from Dr. Ortiz's team, they'd been locating surviving Draca dragons across multiple star systems. Most were like Ember had been, alone, feral, struggling to survive. Some were older and completely wild. But the young ones, the orphans, they could still be reached. The first dragon they'd brought to Terra Nova had been a male named Ash, found scavenging in the ruins of a crashed colony ship. He'd been terrified, aggressive, nearly feral. But Ember had worked with him, speaking in the reconstructed dragon language that Dr. Ortiz had taught her, showing him he was safe. It had taken 3 months, but Ash had transformed. He could speak now, could read basic text, could hunt without destroying everything in his path. He was currently living in the northern section of their property, carving out his own territory but staying close enough to visit regularly. The second and third dragons had been sisters, barely past their first molting. They'd bonded with Ember immediately, treating her like the older sibling they'd never had. Rachel had built them a separate dwelling, but they spent most evenings gathered together, and Rachel would sit with them and read stories or teach them about the wider galaxy. Now 4 more were coming. And according to Dr. Ortiz, there were at least 8 others who'd been located and were being assessed for rescue. Are you nervous? Rachel asked, studying Ember's expression. Yes, Ember admitted. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't help them the way you helped me? Rachel reached up and placed her hand on Ember's cheek. You're going to be wonderful. You know what they're going through because you've lived it. You speak their language, both the words and the pain. And you have something else, you have hope. You're living proof that dragons can have a future. Ember leaned into the touch, the gesture still so familiar after all these years. I had a good teacher. The morning passed quickly. Rachel checked the landing site one final time, a flat area of grassland they'd cleared specifically for transport ships. Ember flew overhead, her massive form casting shadows on the ground, making sure the perimeter was secure. The other 3 dragons emerged from their dwellings to help, their excitement palpable. When the transport ship finally appeared as a gleaming speck in the purple sky, Rachel felt her heart rate pick up. Beside her, Ember made a low humming sound, the draconic equivalent of taking a deep breath to steady yourself. The ship landed with a blast of displaced air and engine noise. Dr. Ortiz was the first to emerge, followed by 2 handlers and a veterinary specialist. Then, slowly, the 4 young dragons were guided out. They looked exactly like Ember had 3 years ago, thin, scared, scales dull from malnutrition and stress. The smallest one, barely bigger than a large dog, was trembling visibly. Another had scarring across her wings. A third was making distressed sounds that made Rachel's chest ache. Ember lowered herself to the ground, making herself less threatening. Then she began to speak in the dragon language, her voice gentle and melodic. The young dragon's heads swiveled toward her, their eyes widening. One of them took a hesitant step forward. Rachel stayed back, letting Ember lead. This was her moment. Ember continued speaking, and gradually, the young dragons relaxed. The smallest one crept closer, then closer still, until she was pressed against Ember's side. Ember wrapped a wing around her carefully, still speaking in those soft, musical tones. Rachel felt tears on her cheeks. Dr. Ortiz moved to stand beside her. She's telling them they're safe now, the doctor translated quietly. That they are home. That they're not alone anymore. Over the next few hours, Rachel and Ember worked together to settle the new arrivals. They showed them the caves, the water sources, the hunting grounds. Rachel explained the rules: no hurting each other, no flying into town, fire breathing only in designated areas. Ember translated and added her own reassurances. By evening, all 4 of the new dragons had eaten, been given medical checkups, and were resting in the eastern caves. The smallest one, a female Ember had named Spark, refused to leave Ember's side. "She reminds me of me," Ember said softly as they watched Spark sleep, curled against Ember's flank. "Scared. Alone. Desperate for someone to care. And now she has you," Rachel said. "Just like you had me." They sat together in comfortable silence, human and dragon, watching the twin moons rise over Terra Nova's landscape. In the distance, Rachel could hear the other dragons settling in for the night, sounds of life where there had once been only silence. "Mom?" Ember said after a while. "Yeah? Thank you. For not leaving me on Draco Prime. For fighting for me. For teaching me that family isn't about blood or species." Rachel leaned against Ember's side, feeling the warmth radiating from her scales. "Thank you for trusting me. For staying that first night at the crash site. For showing me what love really means." "What happens next?" Ember asked. "Dr. Ortiz said there might be dozens more dragons out there. Maybe hundreds scattered across different worlds." Rachel smiled. "Then we bring them home. We teach them their language, their history. We help them remember what their people once were. And maybe, if we're very lucky, we get to watch them become something even greater. A new civilization. Maybe. Or maybe something better, a civilization that knows how to survive the darkness because they've lived through it. Dragons who understand loss and hope and the value of connection across species." Ember was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm going to need a bigger cave system." Rachel laughed, the sound echoing across the grasslands. "Yeah, probably. We'll figure it out." Inside the house, Rachel's communication console chimed with an incoming message. More dragons located. More rescues needed. More orphans waiting for someone to tell them they mattered. Rachel looked at Ember, at the sleeping dragonlings, at the impossible, beautiful family they'd built from desperation and determination. "Ready to change the galaxy?" she asked. Ember spread her wings, backlit by moonlight, magnificent and powerful and kind. "With you, Mom? Always." And somewhere in the universe, on dead worlds and forgotten outposts, orphaned dragons waited. But they wouldn't wait alone for long. Because a human who refused to abandon a frightened hatchling had started something that couldn't be stopped. A movement of compassion that crossed species, that transformed loss into hope. The Draca people would rise again, not because humanity conquered or controlled them, but because one human chose love when it would have been easier to walk away. And that made all the difference.